Well, Terry Pratchett is teaching children to be activists. And to that, I say cheers. Cheers. Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about books, and not only books, but one book in specific, and not only about one book, but a Discworld book. And that Discworld book is number 30 in publication order. It is The We Free Men by Terry Pratchett, and it is a Discworld book for children. And it's the beginning of the Tiffany Aching series, which a lot of people think might just be Pratchett's best sub-series in Discworld. I am undecided, but I do very much appreciate them. And today we'll talk about the first one. How are we going to do that? Well, the usual way. I'll give you a quick rundown, synopsis kind of thing, why you should go and read it or read it to your children. And then we'll dig into spoiler-filled discussion of themes and stuff, and then we're done. And then at the end, I'll ask you to like and subscribe and share and maybe give me money, the usual stuff. You know the drill, so I guess let's start it. Alright. The We Free Man is the story of a 9-year-old girl that decides to become a witch and has to save her little brother and, well, save the world, basically. And she does that. And all on her own because help is not available at that moment. And that's what being witch is all about. It's a children's book. It's very powerful. It has some very positive messaging in there. And I highly recommend you go and read it. It can be read without any prior knowledge of Discworld. It's a good introduction to the Discworld world. And, well, a lot of fun. Beside everything else, because it has the Nac-Mac-Feagles, and they are all about drinking and stealing and fighting, and those are very positive qualities for any character in a children's book, I think. But, as I said, it's also good for adults, because the themes it deals with are, obviously, adult themes, because that's the kind of books Terry Pratchett writes. So yeah, not much more to say, because I don't want to get into spoilers here. You should go and read it, or go and read it to your children, and they'll be very, very happy and become good humans afterwards. Or something like it. Alright, you do that, I'll have a sip of beer, and then we'll meet again and talk about spoilers, shall we? See, that didn't take too long, right? So let's talk about a few of the aspects that make The We Free Man such a good book, in my opinion. And we'll start with the first part, which is the children's book part. See, children's books are kind of difficult, or shouldn't be, but a lot of times they are, because humans, or adult humans, think that children can't be taken seriously. You have to talk down to them. You have to prepare stuff for them, and that may be true in some regards, but it does ignore one fundamental fact, and that is, if you're a child, the world is still complicated, difficult, and, well, serious. And while the thought processes of a 9-year-old kid and the thought processes of a 30-year-old person may differ in the individual perception, that's not the case. As a 9-year-old, you still face dramatic problems and world-shattering events. They may be some that other people may not perceive as such, but that doesn't mean that they're not real in that situation. So the best thing you can do with a children's book is, well, don't talk down to the audience. Take them seriously, take their problems seriously, and show them that that's valid. And Terry Pratchett does that. Following Tiffany Aching, a 9-year-old girl, does exactly do that, because we see her facing up to the problems that she can face up to, and the ones she probably shouldn't face up to, but still has to, because, well, someone has to, and doing that with the things she can do. And that's a great start for a children's book, because it gives the character that a child audience might identify with, it gives that character agency. It does not just follow along. That character is doing things. The things in the book happen because Tiffany makes them happen. It's not that she's just a bystander seeing all kinds of scenes pass by her eyes, as some children's books are. And, well, while there is some direct talking to the audience, it is very much a serious talking to the audience, not the kind of more like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This is the part where I make fun that of the audience that only the adults understand. No, it's not that. it takes its audience seriously. And yeah, I do appreciate all of that. So let's look at the next part of this. This is a very British book. Now, Discworld has always been very British. We know that. Terry Pratchett was very British, very much a fan of his country, maybe not in a political sense, but certainly in the sense of liking the landscape, the people, that kind of stuff. Very similar to Tolkien in that regard, I would argue. And this part, the Tiffany Aching books in general, does do that a lot. It reads like a love letter to parts of England and the sheep shearing, the shepherding, the chalk country. This is a love letter to a very specific part of England and a very specific lifestyle that has vanished by now, but has not, hadn't really fully vanished when Pratchett was a child. And I think that's what lends this whole book such gravitas in a way. I mean, we obviously know that Terry Pratchett himself had sheep and had one of those shepherds' homes on wheels, carts, whatever you want to call them. And so there's a lot of personal love in the region and the lifestyle or the culture that is portrayed. And I think that shines through. And I think it makes it feel even more British than some other Discworld novels. And I do appreciate all of that. But there's obviously more, because we're not yet done with this video, are we? Let's talk about what this book is about. And it is about growing up. I mean, technically, most children's books are, in some way or other, about learning lessons and growing up. And the interesting thing here is that Pratchett's thesis seems to be that growing up means taking on responsibilities. Now, that's obviously something that we can use in the wrong way. You look at people like, be responsible, grow up, get a job, work in the system, and so forth. And that's not what Terry Pratchett means by growing up. Means taking responsibility for yourself in the ways that you can in that situation do. And that, I feel, is an important message. We have, on the one hand, Tiffany doing exactly that, and taking responsibility for people that can't do it for themselves. But we have another character, and it's interesting to look at Wentworth, her small brother, because he's the one that actually has to do the growing up in this book. Tiffany's already mostly there. She just actually has to apply all these things to the real world. But Wentworth is the one who, as a even smaller kid, is of course relying on external help, stimuli, and so forth, and just demanding all the time. And at the end of the book, he helps Tiffany in his own way at the farm, and has started to become a bit more, well, responsible. And that, I think, is the clear and real message or character development in this book. And it's easy to overlook because, yeah, the book is about Tiffany and not Wentworth, but he goes through that big change. So let's look a bit more at what I mean by being responsible. And that's, of course, the main message, which Pratchett connects to what it means to be a witch, and has shown in like older books, when he was talking about mostly Granny Weatherwax and Nanny Ogg in the witch books. But it's clear here again, and that is, of course, doing the things that no one else can. And it's summarized in the things that Granny Aching's, Tiffany's grandmother, did when she helped people, and how she sorted out life in a very pragmatic way, but also in a very human way. There's obviously the scene with the donkey that Tiffany remembers, and the statement that those who can have to do for those who can't, and someone has to speak for those with no voices. And that's the clearest message to become an activist for morally just causes that you can find in a children's book, and I very much approve of it, because it does go down that road of, yes, you can help if you can, and it's about morals. It's not about, having a job, doing the things that our system makes us do. It's about doing the things that are right, that need to be done on a moral level. Now, Pratchett has always been a very moral author in a lot of ways, but it's a bit clearer on the surface in his children's books, and this one is no exception there. And as I said, I do very much appreciate that. The whole setup that Tiffany decides to become a witch so that no one will ever again persecute an old woman they think is a witch and let her die. I think that makes her as a character very powerful already as a child. And the fact that we're having a young girl and not a young boy here, and that a young girl does have to overcome certain prejudices in a patriarchal, sexist society, which she lives in, is also handled very well. People rely on Tiffany to do all the things, but they don't expect her to actually do the big things, which is why she can run, work at the farm, and people expect her to look after her brother and all of that. But when it comes to actual heroics, people just expect that it was Roland and not her who actually saved everyone, because boys do the saving while women stay in the back and do all the hard work. And Pratchett is subtly, I would say, for a children's book, already subverting those expectations by showing us that they're absolutely not true. And I think that's, once again, something we saw already in The Amazing Maurice, which is Pratchett as an author wrestling with the fact that stories change people's minds, and stories change people's views of the world, and thus writing stories or telling stories, being a storyteller, has a huge responsibility, because you need to be aware of the fact that what you tell people as a story has repercussions in our world out here. So he once again sets up the idea that fairy tales do not reflect the world and can have bad outcomes when it's all about, well, witches being evil, and on the other hand, princesses being rescued by princes, and the rest being just background people, and that being what we build our world upon. And Pratchett is writing against that in all his, furor, I guess, because he's not exactly a, laid-back guy, even though the book does have these aspects. It has a fairly relaxed tone. He's very, very angry with the world and the fact that stories are used irresponsibly. Now, there is, of course, the next part that we need to talk about, which is the Nac-Mac-Feagles. Because there is this thing that we see in Pratchett in a lot of his older books as well, which is that there are two sides to humanity. One is the discipline side, where we, try to do the responsible things and so forth, and the other side is the chaos. I don't want to go all Jungian on you here, because no, but the Nac-Mac-Feagles are that free part, that part that does all the things just purely out of their desire, and they're good at heart, of course they are, but they also like to drink and fight and steal, because that's just what's fun, and not caring about the rules and ignoring them, and that wish, that dream that we can actually all do that, and finding these small freedoms sometimes. I think that's a key component that we see in all of the Terry Pratchett books. It's discussed in a scene in an older book when we talk about death and the death of the rats, and why death lets the death of the rats still live, which is exactly because of that, because even Death, who is a very disciplined person, if ever there was one, needs some part of himself that can do all the crazy things. And in this book, it's the Nac-Mac-Feagles, and because they help Tiffany with all kinds of things, it's very clear that you need that part. We all need that part in our lives as well, because it can be helpful in some situations. Some situations you can only overcome by, ignoring the rules and being chaotic. And I personally do really, really like that. So that's another part that I do really appreciate. I guess we need to talk about dreams next. And of course, that's the other part, right? It's that there is dreaming and there is waking up, and living in our dreams and having everything provided for us in our dreams is, it kind of keeps us holds us back and prevents us from growing up, from facing reality and then actually doing something about it. Just having everything provided for us and living in that dream is what Pratchett works against. But, and that I think ties back to the activism element in there, is dreams are deceptive. Dreams are also tempting because the world sucks. And there is that cynical approach, we need to stop dreaming and just accept the facts. And that's not the message here. The message is stop dreaming, wake up, and actually make the world into the place that you want it to be, and into that dream that you had. That's the message that we see here. And we see how that is built up in the Fairy Queen's realm, where, well, she dreams for everyone else, and they have to, well, live up to her dream in that regard. But then again, the power of dreams is important when we talk about the Jolly Sailor and the whole part when they enter that dream, because you can change the world with your dreams. You can do it in this magical world where Tiffany ends up in, but we can also do that in our world out here, and that's the larger message behind that. And once again, this is a very positive book for children and adults, because that's a lesson we all need to learn. We all should learn. We probably can do with like having it rammed home a bunch of times more, because it's so easy to just give in again and let someone else's dream take over. And yeah, it's not good, is it? Then there is one final thing that I definitely need to talk about, and that is the connection or the relationship between Granny Akings and Tiffany Akings, and the idea of grief. Now, grief is a tough subject to tackle, especially in a book that is about a 9-year-old kid and is probably targeted at people of that age. But it's something we need to face up with, and the idea that there are things we wished we would have said back in the day, or things we would have done differently now that we're older and realize that we have maybe misunderstood a scene. And that part about the shepherdess and about the the not saying things part, I think it's handled extremely well for a book about children, or a book targeted at children. But it does also play with that idea of like what kind of roles we have, and what actually we can learn when we accept these things and bring more understanding in. Because at the end of the day, Granny Akings does accept the shepherdess, and likes that idea of the clay shepherdess, which porcelain shepherdess, which is very different from the reality, because you need, or not need, but these images can be helpful, these images can be powerful, as long as they also still have big boots for kicking people, because that's that's where what it all boils down to. Some people need kicking, and you probably have the proper shoes for that. So that's another part that I really appreciate about this whole book. It does also, once again, fit together very well, right? We have the theme of growing up, the theme of waking up. It is, as so often with Pratchett, a metaphor that is then made literal because it's fantasy, and you can do exactly these kind of things and make metaphors and allegories like literal by making them into fantastic elements. He does that often. Here he does it extremely well. We have a bunch of rebellious Pixies, which is a great joke, doing their thing, and being very much about not being tricked by leaders. And I think that's a final part, the way that leaders may be necessary as, well, people that stand around, because it feels like humanity seems to have this urge to have some sort of hierarchy. We kind of like it, but it's important to not actually believe those leaders. It's the way the farmers deal with the Baron, where it's like, yeah, of course you've got to have a Baron, and he's there and all of that, but at the end of the day, the wise Baron listens to his people, because they know how to actually be farmers and all of that stuff, and just is there to smile and shake hands and do these kind of things. And we see that mirrored with the Macfeagles, who have been betrayed by following the Queen, and they have stopped that, and now they're doing whatever they're doing, but even they still have like a hierarchy. They have their Kelder, who's doing the thinking for them, because they're all, well, boys, very much so. And then they have, well, people like Rob Anybody, who seems to be their main leader, sort of, when they have to have someone who tells them what to do, as Macfeagles. And, all of that just builds to those things that Pratchett has been saying in his, like, adult books forever and ever. But it's made clearer here, and it's mirrored in a way that makes it part of his core philosophy of, well, be pragmatic, help those whom you can help, and try to be a good person that actually changes the world into the world that they want to have, instead of having someone else decide for them. Be the main character in your story. Make sure you are. Otherwise, you'll be, well, someone in the background, and other people will decide for you. And you know what? That's a pretty good message for a kid. That's a pretty good message for an adult, and I'm glad it's there, and I really enjoyed rereading The We Free Men. I hope you enjoyed it too. And if so, then let me know in the comments. I'd love to talk with you about it because, yeah, talking about books is pretty cool. And yeah, like, subscribe, share. And should you be willing and able to help me out, I'm currently running a bit of a small fundraiser to get myself out of some trouble that I've got myself in, and I feel help might be needed in this case. If you can, it's great. There are links down in the description. If not, that's also fine. Just, let's talk about books, because that's cool. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. And until then, thanks and cheers.